So good morning, I am Vasant from linuxvasant.com. So in this tutorial we are going to see how to create the partition and the Linux disk management concepts, everything. So before we start creating the partition, there are some few concepts available you need to understand. So the first one is create the partition. Okay, so before create the partition you have to follow some procedures. The first one is identify the correct hard disk, which means, so in real productions environment you'll be having more than one hard disk connected. So from that hard disk you have to pick one hard disk to do the partition. And the second point is plan the layout. So plan the layout in the sense, you have to decide how much size you are going to give for that partition, all those things. Then by using the fdisk command, you can divide the disk into the individual partitions. If you have a command called fdisk, so you have to use the fdisk command to format any drive and then create the file system on the partition. So create a file system is very important. So in order to store your data on your partition, you must have to format the partition with your desired file system types. And the next one is mount the partition to some mount point directory. So mounting and unmounting concept I will explain you in detail in our upcoming topics. So after completing all those things, the last step is mount the partition to some mount point directory. So you have to create a directory, then you have to attach that file system to that mount point directory structure. So after that only the users can able to visible the newly created partition. Okay, and the next one is Linux disk management. So Linux disk management is very important topic. So in this topic, it contains the create the partition, how to create the primary partition, then adding the disk, removing the disk, then how to create the extended partition. Everything it comes under the Linux disk management concepts. The main important terminology associated with the disk management are the BIOS and UEFI. So I hope you know the concepts of the BIOS, right? So basic input and output system. So when you power on the machine, the first program that run is what? The BIOS. Okay, so the purpose of running the BIOS is nothing but it will check all the hardware devices that are connected to your server. Okay, so each and every hardware it will check and it will generate one report. If no error is found, then it will start the next program called the bootloader program. Okay, so and the next one is UEFI. So UEFI is nothing but Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. So it does the same thing like BIOS only. So UEFI is the modern way, to start the system. It is developed as a replacement of the BIOS. So there are lots of difference between the BIOS and UEFI. So here in UEFI all the settings are saved in the flash memory, whereas in the BIOS all the settings are stored in the non-volatile CMOS memory. And the BIOS it supports only the MBR partition scheme, whereas in UEFI it supports both MBR and GPT partition scheme. I will explain you in detail about the MBR and GPT in our upcoming topics. And the main important difference between the BIOS and UEFI is that it supports only the MBR, that you know very well. And the next one, and also the MBR, in MBR scheme it uses the first sector of the hard disk to store all the necessary informations which is required to boot the system, including the bootloader and the partition table. So the default size of the sector is actually 512 bytes only. So from these 512 bytes, only the 64 bytes are used to store the partition table informations. And also this MBR it allows us to create only 4 primary partition. That is, gradually 4 partitions limit became an issue. So to solve this, a little change was made in the MBR partition scheme. So in that change, one partition was allowed to use as the extended partition. Okay, so a number of logical partitions could be created from that extended partition. Here you can see now, so primary 1, primary 2, primary 3. So in the last one you can use as the extended partition. From this extended, a number of logical partitions can be created. So in Linux we can create up to 15 partitions. And in GPT partition scheme, The maximum size of the partition is 8 gigabits. So GPT allows maximum 128 partitions. Since GPT provides a lot of partitions, that is the 128, and much bigger space in each partition, there is no need to divide the partitions into the primary and logical partitions. Got it? So these are all things you need to know before you create the partition, and understanding the concepts of the primary and extended, how it works, the type of partition schemes available in the operating systems. Okay, so thanks for watching. In our next tutorial we will see how to create the partitions and all those things.